Well, hello and welcome back to Midweek Mashup. Today I'm sitting down with Pastor Eric talking about Jesus Part 2, because one part wasn't enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
This, in our planning center, was called Jesus Part 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Yes.
And then we had to take that off before we send it to the volunteers, but it was fun for our meetings. So why two parts about Jesus?
Yeah, so the first week we did our DBS Sunday, and it was a really good discussion. But when you read the Bible and in the New Testament, it talks about Jesus. Jesus talks about himself as the fulfillment of the law. So like, he's kind of a big part of the story, right? and the passage we did on DBS Sunday was this idea that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He is, like, if we want to know what God is like, we should look to Jesus. So, like, he's kind of a big deal.
I'm kind of a big deal.
And so I really wanted to talk about Jesus' teachings because, and his life, because I think we need to center more on that than we typically do, especially in, Western Protestant churches. You go to a church's statement of faith, and typically it'll talk more about like Jesus's actions and how they save us. That's important, but it's easy to miss who Jesus is, and if he is the image of the invisible God, what does he tell us about God? It's a pretty big revelation, right? And so a lot of times, because the way that Protestantism developed, it actually developed far more out of this may sound controversial. It's not actually, if you read the history of like the Protestant Reformation and the state of the Roman Catholic Church at the time. A lot of Western Christianity was more shaped by Plato and Aristotle than it was by the Hebrew Bible. And so what you get is people who are answering questions that the Bible wasn't asking. It's like they're trying to make the Bible deal with the discussion they're having, and the writers of the Bible didn't know that was their assignment, and I say that tongue in cheek, but so a lot of the questions that are being argued about during the Protestant Reformation are not necessarily questions that the Bible is dealing with. And so we've got a lot of theology, from Europe in the 1500s dealing with European questions in the 1500s, and we talk about it today as if that's the whole point of it. It's like, no, they were trying to figure out for their time and place what this meant and how do we live it out in a new, fresh way. It's a conversation that is really good. Like, even the reformers, John Calvin was famous for saying we should always be reforming. Like, this isn't a one-time thing. Every generation and culture needs to figure out what the Bible means. All that to say, a lot of the questions they were asking can allow for a Christianity that talks about the salvific nature of Jesus' death on the cross. Salvific is a nerdy way of saying Jesus saves, right? And the metaphysical things that are going on, you can actually ignore Jesus' life and teaching in some denominations, and in a lot of arguments over what Christianity is really all about. You don't even have to talk about the Gospels other than what Jesus did on the cross. That's not good. I just think we need to rethink these formulas and how do we, I've heard people say, Jesus didn't preach the gospel. Paul preached the gospel. Because Paul talks about things like justification by faith, and we don't even understand what that means because that's anyway. And so, like, for them, these formulas or metaphors that Paul uses are the gospel, but Jesus preaching the kingdom of God is near, repent and believe, is not the gospel, and that's problematic to say the least. To say that Jesus himself didn't know what the gospel was, he needed Paul to come and explain him to everybody else. He couldn't explain himself. So all I had to say, I just thought it was really important that we just look at what did Jesus show us in his life and his teaching is really important to God. And it's a pretty simple idea. It's really hard to live out, and it's to prioritize love for God and love of neighbor. And if we can focus on those things, we will find God. We will be on a path that continually leads us into the presence of God.
This is how I've kind of said it. Let me know if I'm doing a heresy.
Okay.
Right? But
I love that I get to be the person who decides what's heresy. I like that power. I'll take it. No.
So Jesus shares the gospel.
Yes.
And then his apostles, after Jesus has ascended into heaven,
Right.
Are doing the best that they can to move obstacles out of the way
Yes.
for people to access the gospel.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. Jesus came and preached a gospel that needs contextualized, right? So when Paul is talking to a group of people in Galatia, for example, they're facing different challenges. You know, the challenges that they're facing in that context are there's a group of people telling them they have to become Jewish first and do these outward things like circumcision and different, ritualistic things that they have to do if they want to truly be saved. And so now you have these Gentile people who are like, oh, I guess I got to go become Jewish and then I can become Christian. And Paul is saying, no, you're missing the point of the gospel if you do that. The point of the gospel is not to go through these motions. It is to see what Jesus has done for you as enough, and then to pledge allegiance and follow him faithfully, doing the things that he did and said, right? And so he's going to talk to a Galatian person differently about the gospel because there's different applications of the gospel in their context that are right at the forefront, right? He's not writing theology out of the blue. He's writing to people he knows and the challenges they're facing. So the problem with that is then we want to universalize that message to the Galatians is this completely objective, like once and for all thing that we can plot on everything. And you're like, no, we can learn from it. And there are ways in which we may face similar challenges or whatever. But we have to understand that that's a conversation that we weren't invited into until way after the fact. There was a real conversation between real people in real circumstances. And so yes, Paul does preach the gospel, and he preaches it in ways that his very particular audience can understand and apply it to their lives. And we need to do the same work, right? We need to do that same work for our time and place. And that takes prayer and discernment and conversation. And the gospel never changes, but how we understand it and apply it to our lives will be unique because of where we fall in the history and our location in the world. So, and I think that's just the fun part about our moment at FCC. It's really fun that we get to do this, and we've got an elder board that's really supportive of this, and a staff that's really curious, and a congregation that's really wants to live out our faith in Jesus right here where God has placed us. Because, I've been in religious environments before where we're just having 1500s conversations still, and we're talking about things that like my neighbor does not care about, is not important to their life. And even if they were interested in it, they'd be like, that's a fun curiosity, but like, what does that have to do with Fremont, California in 2025, right? So instead, we get to take a deep dive into Jesus, who he is, what the gospel means for us, and then apply that to here and now in real people's lives. And I love that. That to me is the true work of the church is that kind of contextual theology. Like we have this tradition. We don't know this tradition very well. We think we do, but we don't know this tradition very well. But we tried our best to understand our own tradition, and then we understand our context, and we try to like help translate the two and live that out here and now.
I have like a million follow-up questions.
Sure.
But I feel like they fit better with our upcoming messages. We're talking about salvation and about the Bible. So I'm gonna save those for later. And I'm just gonna ask, like, if Jesus was here today, Jesus walks through the doors of the church, right? What is the most important thing? He's got 30 minutes and he's got to go down to a church down the street and talk to them. Like, what's he telling us that's most important?
One eternity later.
Honestly, I think there's a couple of funny things that come to mind, like, hey, smash your smartphone. You know what I mean? Like Jesus would say things like, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it in the fire. And I don't know that our devices and our addiction to media is leading us to any good places most of the time. But that's very specific. I think, I think he'd say something along the lines of like, why does everybody in here think they're the main character? Because our culture, our devices, our history, all of it has led to this very hyper individualistic way of looking at the world. If God's greatest commandments are love God and love your neighbor, that doesn't make any sense. That we're so individualistic, that we're meant for relationship and community, and the valuing of individual people is good because it, in some ways it's led to, basic human rights. That's a good thing, but it also has gone too far to the point where we all think we're the main character of the story, and so we're thinking of how do I fit Jesus into my life, and it's like whoa, your life is absorbed up into this greater life, the life of God, and a story that spans beyond your time and place, and so I think it'd be something along those lines of like, you just stop thinking about yourself so much. That's all you do is think about yourself. Just stop it, and something along those lines, but. And I'm just as guilty as anybody. I'm not saying that in judgment. I think he'd look at me first, be like, hey, "You lead the way, buddy."
Well, that's good. Thank you for sitting down and sharing a little bit more about Jesus. If you want to hear more from us here at FCC, then I'll go ahead and add a banner to Pastor Eric's message, and we have some more content for you right here.